Sure.
And I
I'm
think
just
they're
struggling
saying
in.
in the order that everyone's supposed to.
Okay. Cool. Excellent.
Can I have one of those? Not now, but later. I think you should give it to the Jaws.
This is the one we put out in November.
No, I have the electronic copy, but I just wanted the...
Okay. I think we'll probably get started. Thank you all for coming. I'm Michelle Nichols. I'm a member of the UN Correspondents Association Board. Thanks for coming to the press conference today. We're glad you guys chose UNCA to hold this. Today we're going to be hearing from Human Rights Watch, Fortify Rights, Amnesty International, and the Global Centre for the Responsibility to Protect on the current situation in Myanmar. Most of you are aware that the UN Security Council travelled to Bangladesh and Myanmar last week, so this is a very timely press conference. And with that, I'm going to hand it over.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Savita Pandey, and I'm from the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. I was in Cox's Bazar a week before the Council's visit, and my organization has been following the situation in Myanmar since 2009. And we believe that crimes against humanity and possible acts of genocide have been committed against the Rohingya. Following their recent trip to Myanmar and Bangladesh, we would like to urge the UN Security Council to adopt a resolution referring the situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court. We hope that the testimonies of the Rohingya about mass killings, rape, torture, humiliation, forced displacement, and the images of burned and bulldozed villages in Rakhine State can possibly move the Council from condemnation to action. As you all know, that despite ample early warning, the Council has failed to prevent or halt widespread and systematic attacks against the Rohingya. And by possibly referring the situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court, they can at least begin the process of countering the narrative of denial perpetuated by the government of Myanmar and bring some measure of justice to the Rohingya. I want to briefly tell you a little bit about my time in the camps. As many of you must have seen the photos or visited the camps, the scale is staggering. The number of people, it's very densely populated. The environmental degradation is extreme, and this will have a worsening effect. I mean, the monsoon will have a worsening effect on the humanitarian crisis because of the amount of erosion and the environmental degradation. The camps are unsustainable. The burden on the host communities is staggering. And I go back to a conversation I was just telling some colleagues about that I had with a few Rohingya teenagers, very precocious, talking to me about Bollywood. They know I'm from India, and then we just started talking about what they want, and they were talking about how they want to go to university, experience college life. They want to go home. They want to go home safely and with dignity. And they wanted justice. They wanted justice for the loved ones they had lost, and they wanted an acknowledgement of the extreme violence that they have faced and escaped from. But a few of them got very serious and told me that they did not have any hope for achieving any of that. They felt that in spite of the vastness of the camps, they are prisoners there. They have no means of livelihood, no means of escape. So with that, we would just like to urge the Security Council to not only think about the situation in Myanmar after their trip from the lens of it being a biggest refugee crisis and a humanitarian situation with the monsoon coming, but actually to attack the culture of impunity that they have been complicit in creating. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Tawanda Mutasa, and I'm from Amnesty International. Amnesty has been documenting crimes against humanity and other serious crimes in Myanmar for some time, and we have looked at satellite imagery, we have looked at photographic evidence, we have conducted numerous interviews on both sides of the border, of the Myanmar and Bangladesh border, and we have witnessed the deportation of more than 671,000 people to date out of Myanmar into Bangladesh. And we call upon the Security Council to refer the situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court for justice to be done, for accountability to be secured. This is important because in the context of Myanmar itself, there are no credible national mechanisms for accountability at the moment. The 2008 Constitution of Myanmar actually empowers the military to conduct trials within itself and to be accountable to itself, with the commander-in-chief as the final arbiter. And this means that when you combine that with the clout of the military, when you combine it with the many years of impunity in Myanmar, when you combine it with the lack of accountability in Myanmar, there is no accountability other than this referral to the International Criminal Court. We believe that crimes against humanity have been perpetrated and continue to be perpetrated in northern Rakhine State, but also in northern Shan State and in Kachin. And we think that the referral to the International Criminal Court would be one sure way in which the Security Council would demonstrate that it does not only rise to the occasion in terms of referrals to the International Criminal Court when faced with a situation in an African country, as some of the criticism has had it, but that where crimes under international law are being committed or have been committed, the Security Council can refer a case to the International Criminal Court for accountability and for justice. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Matthew Smith. I work with Fortify Rights. Fortify Rights has been working with Rohingya communities for several years in Myanmar, Bangladesh, Thailand, and Malaysia. We're based in Southeast Asia. We do independent human rights investigations, and we're also providing technical support to directly affected communities and human rights defenders. I was on the Myanmar-Bangladesh border with our team documenting mass atrocities committed against Rohingya from October to December 2016, and from August to September 2017, and we have teams based in Myanmar and Bangladesh. We've documented how the Myanmar army massacred untold numbers of Rohingya men, women, and children, gang-raped masses of Rohingya women and girls, and committed widespread arson attacks, razing hundreds of villages in northern Rakhine State, making it impossible for Rohingya to survive in their native areas. Soldiers slit throats, threw infant children into fires, burned victims alive, and burned piles of victims in numerous villages in the 3 townships of northern Rakhine State. We published some of these findings in a November report with the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. This report finds mounting evidence of the crime of genocide. I just want to stress as well that the history of violations against the Rohingya population. We're not just talking about mass atrocities that occurred in August. The recent attacks were unprecedented in scale, but the Myanmar authorities have waged violent assaults on the Rohingya civilian population almost every decade since the 70s, and always with impunity. There have also been systematic human rights violations over the years. In 2014, we published leaked government documents detailing restrictions on freedom of movement, marriage, childbirth, and other aspects of daily life for Rohingya in northern Rakhine State. This is a population of people who are not permitted to leave their village without permission from explicit permission from the state, and even when they are permitted to leave their villages, their movement is still restricted tightly. In 2015, we published a legal analysis with a team from Yale Law School that found strong evidence that the government of Myanmar, at that point, strong evidence that the government of Myanmar may be responsible for the crime of genocide.
Today, the government is confining more than 125,000 Rohingya to dozens of internment camps in 8 townships in northern Rakhine State. This is basically a situation of mass arbitrary detention. These are internment camps that are located in areas in Rakhine State that were not actually affected by the recent violence. These are other townships in the state, and that's been going on since 2012. The government continues to deny allegations of atrocities in Rakhine State, and this includes the military and civilian authorities. I'd also like to touch on, as my colleague touched on, the situation in Kachin and Shan states. Fighting between the Myanmar military and the Kachin Independence Army has displaced more than 100,000 civilians since June 2011, and we're still documenting human rights violations committed in the conduct of that situation there. We've documented killings, systematic torture, human shielding, forced labor, arbitrary arrest, and other violations by Myanmar state security forces against Kachin and Shan civilians. Today, like my colleagues here, we're calling on the Security Council to refer the situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court to investigate and possibly prosecute crimes against humanity, the crime of genocide against Rohingya Muslims, as well as crimes perpetrated against Kachin and Shan civilians in northern Myanmar, and possibly others as well. On April 23rd, more than 30 ethnic Kachin civil society organizations called for the Security Council to refer the situation in Myanmar to the ICC. We agree with them wholeheartedly. And in addition, we're calling upon the Security Council to implement a global arms embargo on Myanmar and targeted sanctions against those who are responsible for mass atrocity crimes. And Fortify Rights is in a position to provide authorities with names of perpetrators to that effect. Thank you.
Thanks very much. My name is Parmpreet Singh, and I'm from Human Rights Watch. And I want to wrap up the panel with a reminder of why we're all here. We all believe, all of us sitting at this table, that based on the facts and the law, that the situation in Myanmar should be referred to the International Criminal Court. On the facts, Human Rights Watch, like my colleagues have stated from their organizations, we found that Myanmar's security forces and military have committed crimes against humanity, against the Rohingya population, including forced deportation, murder, rape, and persecution, resulting in countless deaths and massive displacement. We have documented crimes against humanity since at least 2012. As for the law, the ICC is a court of last resort, stepping in only when national authorities prove themselves to be unable or unwilling to do so. Time and again, Myanmar authorities have shown themselves to be completely unwilling to even acknowledge the crimes alleged against its security forces and military, let alone take steps to bring those responsible to book. Here's a quick timeline to illustrate this point. In October and November of 2016, there was a violent crackdown by Myanmar's military, resulting in widespread human rights violations, which the High Commissioner for Human Rights and Human Rights Watch and others characterized as crimes against humanity. The violence and the broader status quo of impunity prompted the Human Rights Council last March to create the fact-finding mission to establish the facts and circumstances of the alleged violations in Rakhine and elsewhere in the country. Myanmar's response? Authorities rejected the mandate and barred the members from entering the country. Last May, the army announced that its own investigations into alleged abuses in Rakhine found no evidence of wrongdoing, except in 2 minor incidents, neither of which matched the evidence presented or alarm expressed by Human Rights Watch and others, as well as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Last August, the government created a commission to look into the same allegations, drew a similar conclusion. It dismissed allegations of any serious human rights violations. No abuses meant, and continues to mean, no justice for victims. And in response to allegations of abuses during the recent operations against ethnic Rohingya, which has led to mass killings, rape, arbitrary detention, and arson, last November, the Myanmar Army's investigation team found no deaths of innocent people. Those who've been critical have been shunned by the authorities. Earlier this year, the authorities stopped cooperating with the Special Rapporteur for the human rights situation in Myanmar, Yang Hee Lee, following her critical report of the human rights situation in Myanmar. These examples show that the authorities in Myanmar have become more intransigent, not less, and impunity has reigned supreme. Against this backdrop, the idea that Myanmar's military and security forces would somehow hold themselves to account feels especially divorced from reality. So at this stage, the only path to justice left for victims is the ICC, and the only way to get there is through the UN Security Council. Thank you.
Thank you all. We're going to turn it over to questions. If you can identify yourself, and please wait for the microphone. Edie.
Thank you very much, Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. I'd like to know what you think your chances are of getting the Security Council to actually do a referral, given that China, which has veto power, is a close ally of the Myanmar government.
I think, we believe that veto is a reality. Veto exists, and it's a prerogative of the permanent five to use it. But in this situation, we believe that a threat of a veto is no excuse for inaction. So we would urge the other members of the Security Council who feel strongly about this, who support international order, international justice as well as norms, to come forward and propose a resolution, and let's see who vetoes it.
And just to add to that, I think to not act, in essence, gives the Security Council a free pass. You're essentially capitulating to the lowest common denominator, and this is about standing up for victims and raising the political costs of those who do stand in the way. But as it is, we have no guarantee that there will be a veto, so it's worth it to try as hard as we can and raise the political cost.
Yeah, I think just to also add to Edith's question, that's quite important actually. We also think that as Amnesty International, we have called consistently on the P5 to not exercise the veto in situations of crimes under international law, of mass atrocity crimes. And we've actually said the threat of the veto, the exercise of the veto in such situations is no less than shameful. China, which you have cited, President Xi has said he believes that China should aspire to make great contributions to humanity. And we are saying here is precisely the challenge of what that means in reality, that the use of the veto in situations where people have been raped, have been forcibly displaced, have experienced all that we have heard in the evidence on the ground is nothing less than shameful. And we think that the political cost of doing that should be something that we all continue to raise as citizens of the world.
Just a quick follow-up. Have any of you been able to meet with Chinese diplomats here at the UN? Are they open to hearing what you've got to say?
We haven't, no, but I would just add to that China has multi-billion-dollar investments in Rakhine State, in the oil and gas sector and other sectors, both onshore and offshore. And mass atrocity crimes are bad for business, no matter what sector you're working in. And so it would be part of the instability in Rakhine State is due directly to the impunity that has been ensured by the Myanmar military over the years. So there is an argument to be made that a measure of accountability in Rakhine State is in the interest of everybody. But beyond that, China does have a complicated relationship with Myanmar, and it's not a given that China would necessarily get in the way of a movement towards of a referral to the ICC. And apart from that, we would like to see unprecedented bilateral leverage used to get China to do the right thing in this situation.
Hi, I'm Carol Landry with Agence France Presse. I had a question for Matthew. You mentioned that you had names of perpetrators. I'm wondering how long the list is, how high up does it reach, and can you talk a bit about who's on the list? And on the issue of China, what we're hearing from Western diplomats is at this point they would like to keep China in the loop, so to speak, rather than expose it through this kind of tactic of ICC referral. with the hope or the expectation or perhaps even the knowledge that China is using its leverage with the Myanmar military to try to improve the situation. I'm wondering if you have any indication along those lines or what you think that kind of thinking is producing. Thank you.
Just on the perpetrator question, we are collecting names that we at this point are comfortable to make available to relevant authorities that would be interested in pursuing some measure of accountability. I could say the names do go straight to the top within the Myanmar Armed Forces. It's also worth mentioning, though, that there are civilian leaders as well who may be liable for international crimes in this situation. But in terms of the names of perpetrators that we're collecting, we have been focusing on the Myanmar military.
Can you say, are we talking dozens, hundreds?
Dozens, certainly, yeah.
Can I just add to your second question? I feel that, as my colleague said before, that the threat of a veto, or to sort of just think about China as a possible, a stumbling block to any kind of action in Myanmar, is also a cop-out for a lot of Western governments. I don't think that there has been a champion within the UN Security Council for Myanmar. Let's put a resolution together. Let's ask for the ICC referral, and then let's see what happens. I think that, whispers and this backdoor diplomacy has not been working. We have 1 million people living in refugee camps, 1 million people which have been displaced. What does this say about the international order and our responsibility to protect these populations? You're letting a government get away by expelling 1 million people from their territory, and this sets precedence for the international order. And China and Russia, who talk a lot about the international order, should also think about these questions.
If I may just add one point on that. The reality also is that increasingly there is no option but for the international community to face the question of a referral to the ICC, because on March 23, the Human Rights Council also came up with a strong resolution that, among other things, included this whole question of the possibility of a referral by the Security Council of the Myanmar situation to the ICC. So even given that, of course, the Human Rights Council is a platform that includes a number of states, and that it is quintessentially the equal platform of states for human rights issues, clearly any state that would oppose the momentum that is being generated in that direction is actually going against the grain.
And just one last point to add on that. In November, there was an expression of unity by the Security Council, and in the press statement, there was the importance of accountability was identified as a priority, and holding to account all those responsible for such acts to provide justice for victims. So there is some unity on this point within the Council. I think it's clear time and again, as I mentioned, that the authorities in Myanmar are incapable of holding themselves to account. So it's time, the clock is ticking to act on that priority.
Yeah, this is Shihabuddin Kislu from Shumai Television, Bangladesh. I'd just like to take the opportunity to ask two questions. One is, it seems to me it's a super PAC to actually help the Rohingyas, those who are displaced. And as you know, the situation of women and children, especially the pregnant women and the children, is very, very vulnerable. And in that perspective, what did you do to protect them immediately in priority basis? And what is this? Is there any proposal from Bangladesh government, or to get any help from international community? Number one. Number two, that when I was going through this paper, I just read that the leader Aung San Suu Kyi, she's not even accepting the allegation when the whole world is seeing in their naked eye that there is genocide and all this crime happened. When I just heard from your part that there are some civilian leader also may be responsible for this. Do you name Aung San Suu Kyi, or how do you see her comment when she is saying that she needs some more evidence to start the proper investigation, quote unquote? Thank you.
Yeah, sure, I'm happy to. On the issue of women and girls, we have, I'm glad you raised that. We have been documenting widespread and systematic rape of Rohingya women and girls in Rakhine State. A number of survivors offered to participate in the truth-telling process and provide testimony to Fortify Rights and other organizations about what they had endured. I would just say that it's a staggering figure of women who've been affected by the violence, women and girls, and they face particular difficulties in the camps in Bangladesh. We've been lately seeing, infant children have been abandoned, and there have been other health problems with Rohingya women who became pregnant, either from rape or during this process, and it needs urgent attention. So we would encourage the government of Bangladesh to cooperate fully with humanitarian organizations that are service providers in the camps, and there are still problems that aid groups are facing on the Bangladesh side of the border that are avoidable, and so I think that would be of urgent need. But also, we would encourage the government of Bangladesh to support efforts toward accountability at the International Criminal Court. The pretrial chamber recently, just yesterday, asked Bangladesh to weigh in on its views towards possible prosecution of the crime of deportation. And we would fully encourage the government of Bangladesh to support that process in the interest of ending impunity for the crimes that have been perpetrated. Lastly, on Aung San Suu Kyi, we unfortunately at this point, State Councilor Suu Kyi is a part of the problem. Her office has consistently denied human rights violations. Her office referred to allegations of fake rape and consistently claimed that Rohingya civilians were themselves burning their own homes down. These really outrageous denials have been coming both from military and civilian leadership. So at this point, we do regard Aung San Suu Kyi as part of the problem.
And just to add on that last point, there are levers available for her to get the evidence that she's asking for. She could let the fact-finding mission into the country. She could allow the special rapporteur to come into the country. So I think this claim that there isn't evidence and that she's in fact open to receiving evidence is disingenuous.
Yeah. And just to add on the second point on Bangladesh and accountability that my colleague referred to. So the application that has been put by the Office of the Prosecutor in the International Criminal Court before chambers to ask for jurisdiction to be established in Myanmar, in northern Rakhine State, on the basis of the deportations to Bangladesh is founded on the understanding that the crime itself is being perpetrated both on the Myanmar side but also on the Bangladeshi side, where people are going. And precisely what you said in terms of the conditions that we are seeing in the camps, the reality of the deprivation, the reality of the unlivable conditions that people have had to experience on the Bangladeshi side reinforces the fact that, as a minimum, Bangladesh, which is a state party to the ICC, and which potentially could attract the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, could also do so on the basis of the crimes that are being committed in Myanmar/Bangladeshi, because Bangladeshi is a part of that. And what we are calling for is to go beyond that and actually say, when you look at the perpetration of crimes against humanity in Myanmar, when you also look at even some of the war crimes that we have documented in the context of Myanmar itself more broadly, even beyond Rakhine State, for instance, Kachin and Northern Shan, when you look at what has been perpetrated by both the military of Myanmar or the armed forces, but also the armed groups that are fighting with the military. In all these situations, there is a basis for a referral to the International Criminal Court to look comprehensively at accountability for crimes under international law across Myanmar.
Any further questions? Anyone? good. Thank you all for coming. And obviously these guys are here if anyone has any follow-ups. Thank you.